The topic of this video is solving multi-step equations. At some point in your life, you've probably played one of those number games where someone says to you, choose a number. And usually you're not supposed to tell the person you're talking to, but let's say for this time that you pick 5. And then the person says, okay, multiply it by 7. So you do that and you get 35. And then they say add 2, so you get 37. And then maybe they say to you, hey, now tell me what your number is. So you say, oh, it's 37. And then they say, I know that your original number was 5. So think to yourself, was that actually magic? Did they magically know that because you ended up with 37, you had 5? No. What they did was they did some math. What they did was they went backwards. So they knew that you had added 2 to get 37. So what they did was they undid that and they said minus 2. So they know you had 35. And then they said, well, they knew that to get 35, you divided by 7. So they hopped back here by saying divide by 7, and they knew you had 5. If you're talking to someone who's decently good with math in their head, they know how to undo what you did, and they can say, oh, I know, your number was 5. So let's think about what this would look like in algebra. We could write an equation to represent this situation. So in algebra, when we choose a number, and it can be anything, that's a variable. So choosing a number means, let's say we pick n to stand for number. And then if we multiply it by 7, I'd put a 7 in front of that n, so now we have 7n. And then if I added 2, that would mean that I put a plus 2 on the end. And then if I knew that I was going to get 37 eventually, I would say, well, that's the answer, so I'll say that that equals 37. So just like we did before, now we have an equation that we can solve. In order to get back from 37 to 5 up here, the first thing I did was subtract 2. And then when I have 7n equals 35, the next thing I want to do is divide by 7 to get back to my original n, which was 5. So what we're doing here to solve equations with more than one step, see, I had to subtract and also divide, what we're doing is working backwards. We're saying, well, the last thing that happened to n was that we added 2, so the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 2. The next to last thing that happened to n was that it was multiplied by 7, so the last thing I'm going to do to the 7n plus 35 is divide. So we're working backwards. Let's apply this to a regular equation. Solve for n. 5n minus 9 equals 71. So we see that n was first multiplied by 5, and then 9 was subtracted. So what we're going to do is work backwards. So since 9 was subtracted last, we're going to counteract that first by adding 9 to both sides, which, when the 9's cancel out, gives us 5n equals 80. Now comes our next step. Since the next thing in backwards order that happened to n was that it got multiplied by 5, what we're going to do is divide by 5. So when we divide by 5, I happen to know that 80 divided by 5 is 16. So that is our final answer. N equals 16. So first we added, then we divided. So our rule in multi-step equations is always going to be work backwards. The first thing you're going to want to do is do addition and subtraction. And your goal should be to get all the numbers on one side of the equation, so the constants, and all of the variables on the other. Once you've done that with addition and subtraction, your second step is to multiply or divide to isolate whatever your variable is, to make its coefficient 1. So in number 2, you see we've got negative 1/2 x plus 3 equals 9. So our first step is going to be addition and subtraction. So that means that we need to get rid of this plus 3, and we're going to undo that by subtracting 3 on both sides. So I'm going to subtract 3 right here and subtract 3 right here. So what that does for me when things cancel out is that I end up with negative 1/2 x on the left side, and on the right side, 9 minus 3 is 6. Now it's time for the multiplication or division. So my coefficient on x is negative 1/2, so I need to divide by that fraction, negative 1/2, which of course means multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of negative 1/2 is negative 2 over 1. And when I multiply the 6 by negative 2 over 1, I'm going to put 6 over 1 to remind myself of that when I'm multiplying the fractions. So on the left side, everything cancels out, and I just am left with an x. And on the right side, 6 times negative 2 is negative 12, and that's all over 1, so I'm not going to put that over 1. And my answer is just negative 12, and we're done. Now, sometimes you might come across an equation that on the left side has some parentheses in it and maybe some additional terms. Before you start adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing, you always want to simplify both sides of the equation. So simplifying means that you have to do two things. If there are parentheses in the equation, the first thing you need to do is distribute. So in this case, what that means is we're going to take this negative 3 and distribute it into this parentheses. So the 7 is not getting distributed. That's its own thing. So I'm just going to recopy it. And then negative 3 is going to get multiplied by m. Make sure that you put this negative with the 3. So that gives us minus 3m. And then the negative 3 also gets multiplied by the negative 6. So negative 3 times negative 6 gives you positive 18. You want to be really careful of your signs when you do this. And then we have equals 15. Once you're done distributing, like we are, the next thing you want to do is check to see if there are any like terms to combine. And in this case, we do. We have a 7 a constant and a positive 18 a constant. So 7 plus 18 is 25, and then I'll recopy the rest of my equation, which leaves me with 25 minus 3m equals 15. And at this point, I'm ready to solve. So first, we're going to add or subtract to move all the numbers to one side. So I have this positive 25 right here, so I need to subtract to get rid of it. So on the left, that leaves me with the minus 3m. You want to make sure that you don't lose this negative sign. It sticks on to that 3. And then on the right side, 15 minus 25 leaves me with negative 10. And now we'll divide both sides by negative 3. And on the left, we're going to end up with an m. And on the right, we see that negative divided by negative, those are going to cancel each other out to become positive. And 3 doesn't go into 10 evenly, so we're just going to leave that as an improper fraction. M equals 10 over 3, and that is our answer. So we're done learning about multi-step equations. Now it's time for you to try a couple on your own. In your notebook, you should copy down these 3 problems and complete them.